Bataan was remembered, and avenged. MacArthur moved to his next great role aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Here on the morning of September 2nd, the drama of surrender reached its climax. In a ceremony that lasted only 20 minutes, the fate of Japan was sealed forever. The 11-man Japanese delegation was photographed by cameramen, perched at every vantage point to record the momentous event for posterity. The stage was set. General MacArthur walked from a cabin to open the surrender ceremonies.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. The terms and conditions upon which surrender of the Japanese imperial forces is here to be given and accepted are contained in the instrument of surrender now before you. I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.
On behalf of Emperor Hirohito, Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signed for the Japanese government. Japan accepted unconditional surrender according to the provisions of the Potsdam Declaration.
The Supreme Commander for the Allied powers will now sign on behalf of all the nations at war with Japan. Will General Wainwright and General Percival step forward and accompany me while I sign?
General Jonathan Wainwright, liberated hero of Corregidor, and British General Arthur Percival, who was forced to surrender Singapore, stood at attention behind MacArthur as he began to write his name with the first of 5 pens. Pen number 1 went to General Wainwright. The second pen was handed to General Percival. The third and fourth were earmarked for the National Archives and West Point. The fifth, Mac kept for himself.
These proceedings are closed.
The main drama of surrender was over. Now, throughout the Japanese Empire, in 5 designated surrender regions, the field armies of Japan laid down their guns. All enemy forces in China yielded to Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. Those in Manchuria and Northern Korea to the Soviets. In the Burma theater, East Indies, and Southwest Pacific, they gave up to Admiral Mountbatten and the Australian commander. Admiral Nimitz took the surrender in the Central Pacific. And General MacArthur in Japan, Southern Korea, and the Philippines.
Its historical architecture and cultural heritage completely destroyed. On February 3, 1945, American forces entered Manila with the goal of liberating the city. In the northern outskirts, the soldiers were welcomed as heroes. Initially, the Americans expected to capture the city quickly, prompting General Douglas MacArthur to announce the recapture of Manila shortly after the troops arrived on the city's outskirts. MacArthur believed the Japanese would abandon the city, just as he had done years earlier in the face of the Japanese advance. His staff had even begun planning a victory parade, mapping out the parade route and selecting the high-ranking officers who would participate. However, the excitement over the Americans' arrival was short-lived. Japanese commander Iwabuchi Sanji immediately ordered the systematic destruction of the city. Japanese troops set fire to and demolished buildings throughout the area north of the Pasig River. The footage shows Manila residents fleeing the suburban areas engulfed in flames, destroyed by the Japanese on February 10th. The Japanese also blew up all the bridges over the river, effectively splitting the city in two. After devastating the northern part of Manila, the Japanese forces retreated to the other side of the river toward the city center, forcing the Americans to cross the Pasig River and engage in a bloody urban battle. The footage shows American soldiers advancing block by block, facing fierce resistance from the Japanese troops. Initially, MacArthur's plans assumed that the Japanese defenders would evacuate Manila in the face of the advancing American forces. The commander of the 14th Japanese Army, General Tomoyuki Yamashita, had ordered his troops to destroy all bridges and critical infrastructure and retreat when faced with a large American presence. However, Rear Admiral Sanji Iwabuchi of the Imperial Japanese Navy ignored the retreat orders and vowed to fight to the last man. Iwabuchi turned the old walled city of Intramuros into a fortress filled with obstacles and booby traps. Faced with heavy casualties, MacArthur, who had initially banned aerial bombardment in the city, authorized the use of heavy artillery. An infantry officer who participated in the battle reported that the preferred strategy for neutralizing the Japanese forces was to use artillery to destroy the upper floors of buildings before moving in. Another common tactic was to set the buildings on fire. When these approaches failed, American soldiers cleared the buildings floor by floor with rifles. On February 23rd, during the assault on Intramuros, American forces set a record by firing 10,000 artillery and mortar shells in just 1 hour. Even as the Americans pressed their attack, the cornered Japanese forces carried out the infamous Manila Massacre, in which over 100,000 civilians lost their lives. Among these atrocities was the massacre of 94 Filipino children at the University of Santo Tomas, one of the many horrific crimes committed by the Japanese during the final siege of Manila.
The US concentrated its military efforts on also ending World War II in Asia. To do so, the American Air Force relentlessly bombarded numerous Japanese cities, not in the last place Tokyo. Hardliners in the Japanese government refused to surrender, which made President Truman decide to deploy an atomic bomb on Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945. Still, the Japanese government did not give in, so a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki 3 days later on the 9th of August 1945. The US did not have enough plutonium for a third nuclear bomb, but unaware of this fact, the Japanese Emperor Hirohito on the 15th of August announced that his country would accept the declaration of the Potsdam Conference, thus agreeing with its terms for unconditional surrender. For the first time ever, Hirohito addressed the Japanese population by radio, thus informing them in rather complicated wording that Japan had surrendered. It was the first time that the Japanese population heard the Emperor's voice. This is part of the restored audio recording of his speech.
各世界の体制と帝国の現状とに鑑み、以上の措置をもって自局を収集せんと欲し、ここに終了なる汝親民に次ぐ陳は
The full restored speech and AI regenerated video can be viewed here. Here is President Truman's full speech to the nation and the entire world.
I have received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government in reply to the message forwarded to that government by the Secretary of State on August 11th. I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan. In the reply, there is no qualification. Arrangements are now being made for the formal signing of the surrender terms at the earliest possible moment. General Douglas MacArthur has been appointed the Supreme Allied Commander to receive the Japanese surrender. Great Britain, Russia, and China will be represented by high-ranking officers. Meantime, the Allied armed forces have been ordered to suspend offensive action. The proclamation of VJ Day must await upon the formal signing of the surrender terms by Japan.
Immediately thereafter, journalists rushed back to their offices to provide their editors with the text of Truman's speech. The 15th of August 1945 has gone into history as VJ Day. After President Truman announced that Japan had surrendered, hordes of people took to the streets to celebrate that the World War was finally over. Servicemen were rejoiced to learn that they finally would be going home to their loved ones. Please watch my separate video about VJ Day. It took over 2 weeks before the Japanese surrender was formalized by signing the so-called Instrument of Surrender. A very special location was chosen for the ceremony, namely on board the battleship USS Missouri that was moored in Tokyo Bay. Days before, Japanese pilots had helped to maneuver the Missouri in position, passing the wrecks of many destroyed Japanese naval ships. After boarding the Missouri, the Japanese pilots were thoroughly searched before being allowed on the bridge. These preliminaries also involved an elaborate trial run of the flyover, involving at least 500 aircraft. It was a spectacular sight.
A photo of a P-51D Mustang fighter from the West Virginia, United States Air National Guard, taken after January 1947 during World War II. Photo of Chiang Kai-shek and Song Mi-ling, taken in the late 1940s or early 1950s during World War II. A photo from World War II showing General of the Air Force Henry Arnold, taken between 1949 and 1950. Photo of Ivan Bagramyan during World War II, taken between 1945 and 1960. A photo of a restored A-36A Mustang aircraft from World War II. A photo of Chinese Communist forces using Type 97 Kai tanks during World War II in 1949. A photo from World War II showing the USS Snook. A photo from 1950 shows the USS Missouri battleship shooting its big guns in North Korea. The photo is a colorized version of the original black and white image. Truman gave General Douglas MacArthur a citation after they met at Wake Island on October 14, 1950. In this photo from the 1950s, we see a U.S. Air Force forward air controller talking to a U.S. Army tank commander next to a M26 Pershing medium tank in Korea during the Korean War. Photo 1 of 2 shows a Ki-9 aircraft that was captured at Airfield K-1 in South Korea in 1951 during World War II. Second photo of a captured Ki-9 aircraft at Airfield K-1 in South Korea in 1951. A photo of Rear Admiral Burke, painted by Sanji Nami in 1951 during World War II. A photo taken from the cockpit of AF-4U-4B Corsair fighter of U.S. Marine Corps Squadron VMF-323 shows another Corsair fighter in Korea, between 1950 and 1951. A photo of AF-4U-4B Corsair from Fighter Squadron 114 on the flight deck of the USS Philippine Sea, a fleet carrier off the coast of Korea in February 1951 during World War II.
In Australia, Mrs. Douglas MacArthur, wife of the Allied commander in the Southwest Pacific, sponsors a new destroyer built by Australian workmen.
Listen thee, Bataan, and may God bless you.
And His Majesty's Australian ship Bataan goes down the ways, dedicated to avenge the gallant fighters in the Philippines whose heroism will never be forgotten.